So look, it was 1989. There's a TV show called Seinfeld that hit the air, created by Jerry Seinfeld, Larry David. I think you're familiar with it. What the show did is it completely upended what was expected on network television in that, yes, there were stories of the week, but none of them were necessarily with happy endings where people learn each other and hug each other at the end. The show was infamously saying no hugging. And it was really a rejection of every sitcom that had been on the air up until now, where somebody learns a lesson at the very end, becomes better people. Because they upended the structure of the sitcom, what you found is over the next 10 years, TV creators, writers, they always want to follow the sort of movement of the time. And so they all started sort of leaning into what became effectively sort of hangout comedies, no longer burdened by the idea that characters needed to learn something at the end. You just got this entire decade plus of TV characters who are just going through the motions. They're having the adventure of the week, and it becomes the what is known by people as the hangout sitcom. It's about just hanging out with some characters that you really want to spend some time with. Now, that's obviously carried through, the 2000s Parks and Recreation and New Girl and all sorts of sitcoms that have followed since. Very much the idea of the hangout comedy has been part of the television experience. Now, it wasn't just happening in sitcoms. You can also look at other, we'll lean more towards youth-orientated programming. In the early 90s, just as Seinfeld's coming about with their sort of less structured, but still kind of structured TV sitcom, you've got programs like, say, Beverly Hills 90210, which are also sort of creating a bit of a hangout experience for young people to watch it on TV. Now, none of this is new as a form of screen storytelling. This had been happening right from the late 50s, early 60s, where you've got the hangout movie, the thing like the beach comedies with Annette Funicello and that guy whose name's just dropped out of my head. You've got those beach movies, and you go and see those when you're in the 60s, and the plot of that is completely irrelevant. All you're there for is to hang out with some pretty fun people, cute people on screen. There's some nice visuals with beaches and all sorts of, crazy stuff going on. There's music playing in the background, there's musical sequences. Like, it's really, you're going out there for a movie party. That's what you're there for. As we think about the movie Mannequin from 1987, I think it's important to think about this as the last vestige of the Hangout movie. Simon Foster, I'm going to bring you into the conversation now. Hello. And to the audience, this is Best Movie Year 1987, where we explore the movies of 1987 chronologically from beginning through to the end. And this, Simon, I think is an end. What do you think?
Well, look, gee, it was a long journey to get there, but I absolutely agree what you're saying. Mannequin is a it's 1987, but this is a very old-fashioned movie. I think that on our journey in this podcast, where we are going to try to establish if 1987 was indeed the best movie year ever, there's going to be a little asterisk next to Mannequin, and there's certainly going to be an asterisk in terms of this is a movie which I struggled with because as a professional critic of
So
40 odd years, I can look at it and go, oh boy, this isn't very good at all. But as someone who grew up with it being everywhere all the time, which is certainly different to what's happened now, but I've seen this movie half a dozen times and I have a fondness for it. So there's the asterisk.
look, I mean, I would say that I struggle with this movie as someone who enjoys entertainment. So that's partly where I'm coming from with this one. Yes, it is an old-fashioned movie, and you can trace that lineage back to those beach blanket movies from the 1960s.
Frankie Avalon was the name
Frankie Avalon,
we're thinking
Annette
of.
and
Yeah.
Frankie. I knew it was on the tip. I just could not get it out. But look, you can very
That's
much
what
trace this
Frankie said.
Hello. You can very much trace its lineage back there, but it's a film very much of the moment. If you think about this being 1987, this is a film that stops at least once for a extended musical
Oh,
montage sequence, which is very much of the style of the MTV music video of the moment. And you look
sure.
at other films being like romantic comedies sort of being released of the moment, these sort of very youth orientated, let's talk to the teenagers, let's talk to the early 20 somethings.
Yeah.
And you look at this sort of following films like, say, Electric Dreams, for example. And that's another film that does sort of very similar things where the narrative would just be interrupted for what's effectively a music video to be
Yep.
dropped in.
Yep.
And it just kind of feels of the piece with that. So it's such a modern movie for 1987, but definitely has those sort of tendrils reaching back
All
in
right.
time.
Let's put it in perspective. Mannequin was released in the US on February 13, 1987. Clearly, they were going for the Valentine's Day audience.
Mm.
And given that the film, and we'll drop in the box office very quickly here, given that it ended up taking $42.5 million in 1987, in 2024 dollars, that's nearly $119 million. So this was a sizable hit for everyone involved. It
Do
did.
you have the budget of the film there? Because it's pretty small.
Yeah, it was very small. I don't have the budget for it, but yeah, there wasn't a lot of money spent on this one. Not that it shows. I thought it was quite a good-looking film up on screen. It's a pretty film to look at, and everyone in it is very pretty. But it absolutely nailed the Valentine's Day audience. I don't know what it opened against, but it sort of stumbled quite a bit. It sort of took the chunk of the box office in that regard. Now,
Well, sorry, Simon, I'll just interrupt here. $7.9 million was the reported budget
okay,
for it.
so
Yeah,
big
and so
bucks.
big bucks, and so obviously made a fair bit of money, and that leads to an inevitable sequel, which, let's talk about Mannequin 2 on the move.
Oh, let's not.
Now, if you think about the revenue that you saw from that first film, so budget 7.9 million, box office 42.7, like that's a pretty good return.
Sure.
How do you think that went for Mannequin 2
Oh.
on the move?
With William
bearing,
Ragsdale.
bearing in mind, we never saw a sequel to it.
Yeah. I don't
Yeah.
know. No, it did terribly, the sequel. I don't even think the sequel sort of saw a cinema screen here in Australia.
Look, I'm not sure about that, but I can tell you it cost $13 million to
Oh
make
my gosh.
and a box office of 3.8.
Good one, Mannequin team. Let's drag it over the coals.
But look,
Now,
Simon, what I will say just on the conversation of Mannequin 2 on the move,
yeah,
I know you're going to get to the question a little bit further in, like, what's my relationship to the movie? And I want to just cover this up the upfront here.
yeah.
Obviously, I was 7 years old. I didn't see any of these films in the cinema.
Mm,
If you asked me last week, hey, Dan, what's your relationship with Mannequin? I would have told you I watched this a lot as a kid on VHS.
sure.
Okay, but the difference between watching this week and say Outrageous Fortune a couple of weeks ago is that that was another film that I watched a lot as a video as a kid.
Mhm.
Okay, but when I was watching Outrageous Fortune, I was watching scene after scene, and it was all coming to mind. I suspect I've rewritten my history. I don't think I ever saw Mannequin more than a couple of times on VHS, but I think I watched a lot of Mannequin 2 on the move.
Oh, really? See, now I can't even remember ever watching Mannequin 2 on the move, whereas Mannequin, and that is a very strange word to say a lot, Mannequin. That's going to mess with
Whatever.
my head today. Oh, no, this was a movie that I saw originally at the Hoyts Entertainment Centre in town, and you'll hear that referenced plenty of times through this podcast. I did a lot of time on George Street in Sydney here. That didn't come out right, but you know what I mean.
Judy.
Yeah, at Judy, yeah. And yeah, just countless times on VHS. So this was a film that I was a little surprised by, because when I went to enter it into my Letterboxd page, now I've been on Letterboxd for about a dozen years, maybe 10, 12 years, something like that. At some point in the last 10 years, I'd watched this. I'd already given it a 3 out of 5 rating. So
Yeah.
I was like, oh, okay, so I have watched this recently. But all of this came flooding back to me. There are passages of this which I know incredibly well. The problem we had, or certainly I had, and which you fixed for me, was where to watch this film. Now, this is a movie that I don't know whether it's a music rights issue, because it's got the big Jefferson Airplane Starship, which I think is a hovercraft, song in the middle of it. So there may be music rights issue that are keeping this off the streamers, but you can't find it anywhere to watch nowadays.
Look, I think it's probably just mostly an issue of general interest and taste and
No,
demand.
no, no. That's the thing. This is a very popular movie. And I know I've got it on DVD, but I don't think it survived the purge a couple of years ago. It's probably in storage somewhere. So I couldn't find it. So you helped out very kindly. Thank you to help me watch this again. But yeah, it's strange that it's not even in a rip on YouTube. Is there a version of this, which is very unusual.
Yeah, look, I mean, music copyright issues don't necessarily hold things back on YouTube entirely.
No, it's
People
strange.
often find a way.
All right. Look, what we usually do in this situation is give a quick plot rundown. Somehow I've managed to get it out to 6 lines. Bear with me.
Sorry, Simon, before we
yeah.
do the plot, let's play
Yes.
we'll play the trailer and then
Oh,
we'll do
sure.
the
Let's
plot.
do that. Yeah.
Jonathan Switcher
I'm Sex.
loves to talk to his work.
You know, you're the first thing I've created that made me feel like an artist. Don't you like your new scarf?
He never expected
Not especially.
to hear it talk back.
I really think I'm going crazy.
I am so glad you're working here. I never thought they'd hire anyone stranger than me.
You're the only one who can see me like this.
To the rest of the world, he's a disaster.
You're fired.
And she's a dummy.
You are one sick puppy.
But together,
Hey, don't do that.
You weren't so shy when you were creating me.
You weren't so real.
they make magic.
Look at him with the dummy.
Who are you to criticize? I'm that new stock boy, and I just want you to keep an eye on him for me.
I think I'm gonna handle things my own way. All the girl mannequins disappeared from the windows last night. Film at 11. Yes, my dear, your favorite. She is gone too. Get him! Mine's bigger than yours is! Go get him!
You're magic.
He's talking to the dummy again.
Andrew McCarthy, Kim Cattrall,
You know I would never bother you when you're getting a piece of wood.
Mannequin.
Unemployed, or more accurately, unemployable artist Jonathan Switcher, Andrew McCarthy, lucks his way into a job as an assistant window dresser for a department store in decline. Now, when he happens upon a beautiful mannequin he previously designed, she springs to life as Emmy, Kim Cattrall, a pretty Egyptian from 2516 BC, I made note of that, who's trapped in an eternal spell by ancient gods. Despite interference from the store's devious manager, James Spader, and a buffoonish security guard, your man, G.W. Bailey, Jonathan and his mannequin fall in love while creating eye-catching window displays to keep the struggling store in business. And there is the very fairy tale plot of a major motion picture. Hard to believe, but it's really happening. You know, when you look at it in that regard, what they were trying to go for here, I think, in some respects, is the kind of magic that Ron Howard and Tom Hanks and Daryl Hannah created with Splash. It's a preposterous story, a total fairy tale, but when it's done right and captures the kind of magic that Splash did, it's wonderful to watch. Now, Mannequin is definitely trying to do that. It fails in that regard, or maybe it succeeds on its own terms, but it's not unusual to see these sort of movies.
Look, it's not, and you say that it was a bit of failure, but I'd say that maybe it was a success. Like, I think just for the time, it was
sure.
Absolutely nailed it. I think obviously it just doesn't necessarily hold the test of time, which, you know, I don't know how much to really sort of judge it on. Like, I clearly wasn't entertained by the movie, but it's certainly of a moment and really interesting to watch and discuss based off the back of that. Just because we obviously do like to put things in a little bit of context, and this is a movie which, as I said, very much speaking to the kids of the moment and is almost a music video, but put to the cinema screen. Just letting you know, the number one song on the charts that week, Simon, was Open Your Heart by Madonna. So it's very much of that era.
Very much of that era, yeah. You can see the vibe there.
Yeah, other songs in the charts at the time, Living on a Prayer by Bon Jovi. What else do we have? Touch Me by Samantha Fox.
Nice.
Will You Still Love Me by Chicago. You know, Change of Heart by Cyndi Lauper. You know, it's of a moment. And speaking of a moment, you obviously want to know the current positioning of At This Moment by Billy Vera and the Beaters.
Where are we, Billy?
This has dropped down to number 2. So it's just no longer number 1, but it's still right up there.
Career decline. Sorry, Billy. I'm sure things will be much better for you next week.
Yeah, I'm sure. I'm sure that, you know, the next single will do just fine for them.
Let's have a look at the key players here in the Mannequin universe. Andrew McCarthy is your leading man. Now, at this point in the Andrew McCarthy career, his star was shining pretty bright at this stage. He was coming off St. Elmo's Fire and Pretty in Pink, and this was his big sort of broad comedy leading man gig, his first one. 87 was a big year because a little film called Less Than Zero, which we'll look at a little bit later in the podcast, was also to come out this year, which was a very serious dramatic turn for him. So things were looking up for Andrew McCarthy. Thoughts on him as a leading man? The words anemic come to mind. He throws himself into it. I got to say that. I don't think he doesn't do what the film asks of him. Just whether it makes him a likable kind of guy is debatable.
Well, I don't think he's unlikable in this.
No.
I don't think he's got a lot of presence in the movie, which is probably where it sort of falls apart.
Yeah. Yeah, I think you're right. Also in there, you've got James Spader, who was back with McCarthy after Pretty in Pink, and also coming up in Less Than Zero. He plays one of the great bad guys in Less Than Zero. Now, James Spader, I don't know whether he's sort of basing his performance on kind of a British kind of Terry Thomas sort of character. If he had a mustache, he would have twirled it. He's that kind of cartoonish villainy role in this one. I've never seen him do anything like this before or since.
But isn't that just James Spader generally? Like, can you really look at a James Spader performance and say you've seen it before?
Yeah. He's once again, everyone seemed on board for what this movie was trying to be, and that's the big, broad sort of fairy tale romance. And him and G.W. Bailey certainly throw themselves into it. Now, I know you love your GW, your Police Academy obsession, and this is a repairing of the Police Academy team with Kim Cattrall, who I'll get to soon.
Also, good news, this will not be the last we see of G.W. Bailey in this year of movies.
87 was huge for G-Dub. Absolutely it was.
Well, there were 2 movies.
Yeah. Did you get a big laugh out of G.W. Bailey's performance?
No. Not.
There were the 2 or 3 moments where I had a bit of a giggle. Included a line that James Spader says to him, "Did you ever jump out of a plane and land on your face?" And he goes, "Yes," which I thought was just out of the blue and very funny.
You know what? You and I see things very differently.
But he sort of throws himself into this with gay abandon. All right, let's talk.
Can we use the phrase gay abandon then to talk about, I think, the MVP of this movie?
Wow, I know. I know where you're going to. This is one Hollywood Montreux. What do you recall of Hollywood Montreux's performance?
Look, okay, so let's talk about. I've never really known how to pronounce this guy's name. It's like Message Taylor.
Yes.
So he's best known for being Designing Women. Mm-hmm. So he was a cast member of that for almost the entire run of it. I think he was more or less a guest star in the early episodes of that show, and they just liked him, and so they beefed up his role. He was there as what was he at the beginning? He was, I want to say, like a delivery man or something like that. And by the end of that series, he's like a lawyer working out of their law firm. 80s sitcoms. Also, I probably know him best from Dave's World, which was a 1990s sitcom.
Now, he plays this very big, broad. Anyone who's seen Mannequin will absolutely remember Hollywood Montreux, who was the head window dresser, head designer at the department store, and he became Andrew McCarthy's good friend in this.
Look, sorry, you say anyone who remembers about, I remember him from a little film called Mannequin 2 On the Move, because he's the one character that carries over to that sequel.
Really, was he? I didn't know that at all. Now, we should point out, he plays this very big and broad gay character who, the actor is not gay. He was married, had 3 kids, married twice, in fact. So, of course, this sort of performance in 2024 terms is, shall we say, a little problematic.
That's the thing is, I don't think it actually is that problematic.
Well, see, now I was having this debate with myself as well. Do we rather see this sort of character on screen? Ideally, it would be played by a gay man or a gay woman and leaning into it in that regard. But is it a bad thing that we see this kind of performance at all?
I mean, honestly, I've never really bought into that idea that an actor needs to be gay to be able to portray gay, much in the same way that there's many, many, many gay actors who play straight all the time. Like, I don't think it's really much of an issue. I think it becomes an issue if they put in a performance that doesn't feel authentic or is, outright offensive. I don't think this character is being outright offensive. Like, it's certainly a very broad stereotypical sort of a performance.
In line with the rest of the film, sure.
In line, that's exactly it. Like, it fits in terms of the tone of the rest of the film. But also, like, while it's sort of broad, I don't know it's necessarily like that offensive. Like, the character is treated with a lot of reverence. He's a beloved character on screen. I don't
gets
think
a lot of the funniest moments in the film. No, I don't think he's the butt of any jokes.
He's never the butt of a joke. Like, it's always the humor's coming from his perspective. He's a very sort of aware person that he knows that he's a very big, broad designer type, and he just owns it entirely. To me, like, he's probably the most sort of authentically interesting character in the film.
I don't disagree with that. I kind of agree. I know there'll be arguments against that, but I sort of agree with you as well.
I mean, I think that if anyone really has an argument against it, it's not so much that character specifically as much as the fact that sort of a character exists in what's a pretty dopey sort of a comedy like this. Like
Sure.
your immediate instinct is to feel that no, this is kind of offensive, but just because you expect it to be offensive. I
Yeah.
think when you actually watch the character, it's like, oh wait, no, it's actually probably pretty positive in a certain sense.
I want to mention very quickly Carol Davis, who played Roxy in this. I had a bit of a crush on Carol Davis in this film. And when I did a little bit of research on Carol Davis, she plays Andrew McCarthy's long-suffering and quite devious girlfriend, Roxy. If you go back a bit over 7 years, she was
Sorry, so we'll talk about the character in a moment.
in a
'Cause,
moment, yes.
let's get into that.
She was known as Tamara Capitas, and she was the January 1980 Penthouse Pet of the Month and runner-up for Pet of the Year. She became a big singing star in France. She wrote a couple of acclaimed novels and is now one of the planet's leading animal rights activists. She's got a terrific Instagram page where she tracks her career and also chronicles her animal rights activities. And that's Carol Davis now. So that was a bit of a surprise to see and hear all those things. I went into a bit of a Carol Davis, Tamara Capitas rabbit hole. That was a fun bit of late night research.
I presume
Yes.
you know her mostly for her music, is that right?
Sure, let's go with that.
Yeah. Look, I found that character that she plays to be just incredibly bizarre. Like, the first, 15, 20 minutes of the movie, she's the long-suffering girlfriend. And then it's almost as though they realized they needed a villain for the piece, and so they just code switch her entirely and she becomes the antagonist. I just didn't understand that character progression at all. It was very bizarre.
I thought she had a bit of the Elaine Bennis about her when she started off. Actually, there was kind of a zing to her performance that had a bit of that. But you're right, she turned bad and then finally gives in to that grotesque Italian stereotype who is keep trying to have sex with her along the way in some of the most hideous office sexual harassment moments of 80s cinema. I didn't get the name of the actor who played that guy, but boy, he was all shiny suits and big hair.
So that guy is Christopher Maher, played Armand. So I don't know that he was Italian. I think he was supposed to be maybe Persian, but yeah, it was.
Oh, wow. So very specific racial stereotyping. I get it then.
Yeah, I think so. Well, let's talk about if we want to talk about, say, because obviously talk about Carol Davis in there. If we want to really
Yes.
talk about just raw sex appeal, I think you know where I'm heading with this one. But Estelle Getty is very prominent in this film.
That's exactly where I thought we were heading with this.
So
Yes, she is.
Estelle Getty's in there. I think she puts in a fantastic performance. This
Best
is,
known for.
best known for Stop at My Mumble Shoot, but also, I guess, if you really want to go into it, The Golden Girls, the
Golden Girls.
sitcom she was on at the time that this movie was going out. I would imagine that lots of viewers didn't put two and two together because Estelle Getty plays much older in The Golden Girls than she actually was.
Yes.
In fact, fun trivia, she is, I believe, the third youngest of the Golden Girls.
Is she really?
Yeah.
I don't doubt that because you're right. She was clearly made up to look older than the others. But yeah, that's interesting. I did not know that for the Golden Girls fans out there. And if you listen to a podcast about Mannequin, you're probably a Golden Girls fan as well.
Yeah, look, there's a strong crossover element there. But Estelle Getty, I don't think she's given any humorous moments at all through the entire film. It's a very sort of straight role. But I think that she's a charismatic presence on screen. She doesn't get lost on screen in a way some of the other supporting actors do.
All right, let's go to the zing here in Mannequin. The performance of the lovely Kim Cattrall. She seems so young and fresh as Emmy, the Egyptian spunky. But she had 30 plus credit to her name by this point. She'd done a lot of television through the 70s and 80s. And she was coming off some very spunky parts in films like Porky's and Police Academy, of course, and Big Trouble in Little China just the year before. So she was, probably certainly more experienced of the cast than Spader or McCarthy and a real industry veteran at this stage. But she plays it like such an ingenue, just such an all-in performance here. And I thought she was really lovely in this. The affection I have for this movie certainly goes towards her as a screen character. There's a lot of. I think they have a fairly sweet chemistry, the two of them, McCarthy and Cattrall. Although she seems a lot older than he is, but that's just the nature of the biz.
Yeah, so your attractions to this movie is maybe sort of less the critical faculties that are being sort of stoked in you and more the horn bag nature. Is that really where we're heading here?
It's kind of me. That's what I do.
Oh, look, we know.
But did you not think she had some fun moments? And we'll get to the montage and the outfits a little bit later. But I thought she kind of charmed her way to a winning performance.
I actually just don't think she's really all that appealing in the movie, but it's not so much her. I just think that is a bit of a dud role. Kim Cattrall I just found kind of interesting in this, and I didn't really find her to be, I mean, obviously she's there as like the cute blonde, and you're supposed to find her sort of fairly sort of winsome and, just generally cute. But I just didn't really find like that much appeal in her. I just thought she was just a bit sort of generically blonde on screen. And that's not necessarily the vibe I've had from her from other like films from, I guess, sort of this era of Kim Cattrall's filmography. Like, I think that she's generally like super cute in Police Academy. I think she certainly stands out in Big Trouble in Little Chinatown. But Mannequin, I don't know, I just found her just super generic, which is, I guess, part of the problem of the movie for me, which is that really it hinges entirely on her performance and the amount of appeal that you find in her.
I think she did remarkable work as one of the most one-dimensional film characters in film history. I think she did almost as much, because when watching it again last night, and with my critic glasses on to a certain extent for the first time on this film. Usually I'm just watching it as a bit of background noise, or as a as a horn dog, or going through one of my 80s sort of melancholy moments. I'll watch something like this. Watching it as a critic, she has so little to do in this other than bounce around and be cute. The plot line that involves...
Just on that, like, because, sorry, spoiler alert, at the very end they get married in a storefront, in the shop window.
It seems like an odd choice for a wedding, considering it's your day job as well.
I mean, presumably they got married. Maybe it was just a presentation. Who really knows? But anyway, let's just assume they got married. The whole idea that he's attracted to this woman who exhibits no personality whatsoever and never develops one, isn't there just something incredibly gross about it?
Well, I mean, if we go down that gross path, then there's other things that come up in this film that'll lead us back to Hollywood Montreux for some people. But yeah, you're right. It's a total physical attraction.
Hollywood's at least a character.
Yeah.
Like, he's got some depth, and, if you want to follow down that sort of Bechdel test sort of thing, like, he does seem to have, like, a life outside of the characters in the thing. Like, he was talking about his boyfriend a fair bit. Like, there's actually stuff going on with that guy. But her, like, she lives entirely just to serve this guy. It's like I Dream of Jeannie, but at least Barbara Eden had, like, a bit going on that wasn't just, turning on the charm for the master.
I thought of I Dreamed of Jeannie too. The other thing I thought of was a little film that came out a few years prior to this called Xanadu, in which Olivia Newton-John also plays a woman cast on Earth by the gods, and who inspires Michael Beck in that film. It was also terrible, but it's a film that I also love for some reason. So I do get that she was a complete sort of one-dimensional character, trying hard, although.
I mean, I'd say there's even more dimensions to Olivia Newton-John's character in A Mum for Christmas, which is again about another storefront mannequin who ends up, falling in love.
Oh, we have to do a mannequin movie. How many mannequin movies can there be? There's got to be some. There were some great mannequins in Blade Runner.
I can think of two really good ones.
Mannequin and Mannequin 2.
On the
move. Director Michael Gottlieb had a big hit with this. This was his first film. Just 2 years before this film, he directed a little project called Playboy Midsummer Night's Dream Party, in which he and his camera crew, with the help of a few hundred celebrities, welcomed Hugh Hefner back to the Playboy Mansion, and his camera sort of went in and out of the grotto and probably saw James Caan in a dressing gown or something. He followed up Mannequin with Mannequin with the Cheech Marin vehicle, A Shrimp on the Barbie, which was shot here in Australia, but it was such a terrible film.
I know that film.
He demanded that his name be removed and be replaced by the infamous Alan Smithy pseudonym. So if you know the story behind the Alan Smithy thing, it's when a director hates his own movie and doesn't want his name attached to it. So, and he did a couple of other films. He did Mr. Nanny with Hulk Hogan, and then one other film and nothing. So despite having a huge hit with his first movie, Michael Gottlieb just couldn't find a place in Hollywood, which I guess that doesn't seem unusual. This sort of broad comedy didn't play for very long and had its own sort of niche place in the world, but who knows? Anyway, let's go on to some observations and things we
Can I issue a challenge to the world? If anyone can find a copy of the Shrimp on the Barbie, like, let me know. I'd just be very impressed if anyone.
How would you even know of that film?
Like it's just one of those films that I remember watching as a kid on
Yeah.
VHS. Like it
Yes.
was, we were down to the video shop every weekend. Like it's,
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
you know.
It was out there, and not a cinema release. So it didn't play in the movies here in Australia. But yeah, it went straight to Warner Home Video back in the day. So, Shrimp on the Barbie. We may have to do a special episode for a Shrimp on the Barbie just to get your views on it. Okay, so I've been clear about. I was torn as a critic, who watching this with my critic eyes, and as a sort of a movie loving diehard romantic I once was, with lots of fond memories of this film, but. What other observations can we take from watching this movie, Dan Barrett?
I mean, first of all, where does one begin? But
Oh,
also,
well.
like, is there anything is probably the big question. Like, I'm not too sure. So, one of the questions I was waiting for is, like, what are the standout moments in this?
Yeah.
Okay. And there's probably, I guess, maybe sort of three things I thought I'd come into this podcast and I wanted to talk about. Okay, so first of all, the most sort of spectacularly sort of interesting sequence is the sequence where she starts talking about being able to fly. And then the interesting thing with this department store, which is one of those sort of classic New York, like old school department stores, but it's got a massive, what do you call like a midsection? Is that an atrium technically?
Not an atrium, kind of
Like
like
the
a.
atrium's usually at the bottom.
Yeah, I
But
know what you mean, but you walk around all the floors and there's a huge sort of.
yeah, hole in the middle, which in a lot of department stores usually where you find your like escalators going up and down, but in this it's just like a big empty void that goes from the bottom floor to the top.
Yep.
And the store is structured this way so you can have this sort of fairly impressive looking sequence where she's on a hang glider and she's like flying around the store, going in circles down to the bottom. And like that was kind of interesting and fun and kind of,
A little bit of magic. There was a little bit of magic in
bit of
that
magic there,
scene.
bit of Hollywood magic.
Yep.
So I check for that scene. The music montage video, which I just thought was incredibly dumb. Okay, entertaining but incredibly dumb.
Yeah.
Yeah, and then
Let
the
me
third-
run through. Sorry, go
Sorry,
on
I
for
was
your
going to say,
third
and then
one.
just the third element I just want to talk about was just this plot element of this guy who he's just a bit of a screw up, and then
Titles.
through no actual skill of his own, it was really the work of Kim Cattrall's Mannequin character. Was it Emmy?
Yep.
Like she ends up designing the store window by accident, and then suddenly everyone is so captivated with what's a fairly generic looking storefront.
The notion of New Yorkers, I think it was New York, gathering around a shop front window to gawk and guffaw at the latest piece of visual merchandising just is look. I should point out, as an ex-visual merchandiser, I spent the best part of 1987, I would say, going in and out of video stores, putting posters up, being a visual merchandiser. I've done my share of shop windows, don't worry. So the notion that this guy becomes the savior of a giant struggling department store and a celebrated visual merchandising artist, I did have a lot of giggles with regard to that because I was regarded as a bit of a goofball, but did some good work.
Look, the thing is, okay, so I'm going to buy into the premise of it a little bit. Okay, and it's buying into it sort of lightly. So, one, the way that it's set up in this movie, I don't buy into at all. Okay, because they're pretty generic looking shop fronts. And the idea that that first shop front, at least, that attracted everyone and that everybody's there to see I'm guessing it's like daily or weekly. I can't remember how frequently he's updating these things. But the idea that everyone's turning up every week to see, oh my God, what has this guy done next? I don't buy into it in the framework of this. I do appreciate that there are some shop fronts which are genuinely, I don't think it's really so much a thing anymore. But I do appreciate there were shop fronts, particularly in cities like New York, where it would be a draw card. You would go and
We're
see
coming into the Christmas
what it
season,
is.
and they're the
Well,
nice
not just-
storefront windows.
Not just Christmas, but like throughout the year, like there would be efforts made to
It's a
really
thing.
say, like, but I just didn't buy into it in the premise of this. I didn't buy into that it was even that exciting a looking shop front. Like, it
No,
was
the
just
tennis
so-
balls was a nice touch, but you could see the rope. You could see the wire pulling them back and forth.
Yeah, there was like a fun one where there's like three mannequins who are cycling, and I thought that was kind of, clever. But, it's just generally rough.
All right, let's go through some of my observations very quickly. There was a little bit of research done by the team behind Mannequin. Edfu, Egypt, is in fact an Egyptian city. It's located on the west bank of the Nile River, and it's
Oh
famous.
wow, they had an atlas.
Yeah, they had an atlas, and it's most famous as the site of the Ptolemaic Temple of Horus. So it is a legitimate historic site. It was interesting seeing the Egyptian queen, who was Emmy's mother back in those days sounded like the most veteran. Who's that New York veteran actress from Only Murders in the Building that you love? Oh, you know the name, with the big glasses and always very droll performances.
Oh, you're talking about
Here we go, testing his memory early in the morning.
yeah, this is too early in the morning.
I'll move on and you come back to that. Do a bit of research.
I could usually name her immediately.
That's what I thought. That's who might have played the Egyptian queen at the start of Mannequin. An animated. Now, one of the things I did love about this is the opening animation sequence. It was done by a lady called Sally Cruikshank, who became one of Hollywood's legendary animators. I just flipped out when I found out she was the person who did the nightmarish animated sequences from Joe Dante's episode of Twilight Zone, the movie, of the little boy who can conjure worlds, and of the sister without the mouth in the upstairs bedroom. She did those. She also did the title sequences for Ruthless People and Top Secret. So that was kind of cool. That opening animation where Emmy's soul, or I guess it was a soul, travels through time and takes different forms. Actually, that raises an interesting point. How did she travel through time? Was it her soul, and did she inhabit different bodies along the way when Christopher Columbus was her boyfriend and she met Leonardo da Vinci, who had an affair with David, and then she just turns up in New York because there were no mannequins back in Christopher Columbus's day.
Okay, Simon, here's the thing. I was saving this for the end of the podcast, but let's just do it now.
Let's stumble across the gold mine. Okay.
It's the big cloud that hangs over this entire film. Okay,
Yes.
So first of all, just before we get too far, are you talking about Jackie Hoffman?
Thank you. Jackie Hoffman, yes.
Yeah, who I first came across in Kissing Jessica Stein back in the day.
Sure.
But, suddenly, she's got onto a very lengthy career as a, interesting character actor.
Okay.
Okay, so look, here's the issue with the movie, which is never really necessarily addressed, but the idea that this Egyptian mannequin lady has traveled through times and just happens to know all the famous people throughout history, like, doesn't this just speak to the fact that this is some sort of mental breakdown for the Andrew McCarthy character? Isn't this really what we're seeing? That's what it is. Like, it really is a guy who's just fallen in love with a mannequin and is fucking his mannequin. Like, that's all that's happening in this movie. But we're seeing it from the romanticized, internal perspective of the Andrew McCarthy character. Okay. But cards on the table, that is what's going on in this film, right?
Look, I think when you bring the very serious subject of mental ill health into this, it probably explains a lot of the movie. And
mannequin abuse.
And mannequin abuse. There's a very awkward scene where he's photographed with the mannequin. Look, if you want to sort of apply real world logic to it, this is, and also sort of movie magic and movie logic to it as well, it probably is some kind of mental breakdown that he's having.
Because as soon as you raise any questions about it, none of it possibly makes sense outside of that. That's the only real answer as to anything that happens in this movie.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. You're absolutely right. It's a strange...
It doesn't explain the G.W. Bailey character at all.
Or the James Spader character, or the Hollywood
Spader character. Oh no, Hollywood's fine. He's all right.
Let's just, if we're going to keep dropping the F word, I'm going to say that this was a fucking Oscar nominee. Now, can you guess which category this was Oscar nominated for?
Look, I don't have it in front of me, but surely it's soundtrack, right?
It's the best music, the best original song. Diane Warren and Albert Hammond wrote Nothing's Gonna Stop Us Now, which was a big hit and probably helped this film move towards blockbuster status. This week's stupid movie moment, and I'm going to raise this when we talk about Lethal Weapon in a few weeks' time. Nail guns don't work like that. You can't fire nails out of a nail gun. That's not what they do. If you fire a nail gun just into midair, the nail just flies off in all sorts of directions. They're not like little machine guns that you can carry around on work sites. So nail guns don't work like that. That's one of those stupid movie moments, like when you get a parking spot right out the front of the building just because it works for the shot. That's one of those things that I hate. So,
do they fire a nail gun in the first Lethal Weapon?
Yeah, don't they?
I remember a nail gun. Sorry.
Yeah. Oh, was it maybe it was the second one?
I think
when
they're
renovating the house. Maybe
that's exactly it, because they're renovating the house.
Yes.
Okay, because don't forget there's the toilet explosion as well.
Okay,
but there's the house renovation because the bad guys come after all the cops, and there's that sequence where you see character after character being their cop mates all being killed.
I stand corrected on the Lethal Weapon reference. I stand by the assumption regarding nail guns don't work like that. Now,
Okay, also, I'd just like to let everyone know about our special YouTube spin off where you will see Simon and I in a field with a nail gun, and we're just going to test the validity of that.
Day of the Jackal style, firing it at a watermelon. We'll see what happens. Yeah.
I just thought we'd fire at each other.
Oh,
Just
yeah,
be
that'd be a
us
good
running
thing.
through fields with nail guns.
William Tell style. Okay. Look. Also, what are they selling in the windows? I didn't see a brand or a price anywhere. They're just sort of building these windows with like sporting. I guess sporting goods is what they're actually selling. So I don't know. Let's rate Emmy's outfits. Gangster mole, hair rocker in a lift. This is all part of the montage sequence. That beautiful blue satin dress suit. That would have won Carmela if she'd come out in that. That would have been a winning outfit.
I'm not sure I'm Hollywood enough to have paid that much attention.
For me, the pink bike riding outfit, the tight onesie that you mentioned previously, the blue and black cubic bikini, the winner, of course, and you know where I'm going with this, Dan Barrett. Don't pretend you're not a little bit hornbag yourself. The fur coat underwear reveal was clearly the number one outfit in Emmy's roster of duds, don't you think?
Look, I mean, I would probably say that if you're going to talk about Dan Barrett Hornbag, I did talk about Estelle Getty earlier. So
that's very true. You raised that point, sure. And finally, I think this is the first 1987 film that ends on a freeze frame that we've done. I thought the freeze frame. Now that is, when they get to the end credits, they've just had their storefront window wedding, and they picked the most unusual freeze frame where she literally looks like a mannequin, and he's got this goofy grin on his face. I don't know how they choose which frame to freeze on, but they chose badly in that case.
Yeah, I never think they choose a freeze frame well.
No, it's a skill to it, and that let the film down, the final frame.
Outside of the Police Squad movies, I don't think they ever choose the freeze frame right.
That's true. You mentioned my most memorable scene. I thought that the indoor hang gliding sequence was a little bit of magic that the movie could have used a little bit more of, but kind of speaks to why I have a certain affection for this film. Now, MVP, you said, was Hollywood?
No, I said Estelle Getty was
Estelle
MVP,
Getty. Okay.
But that's just by default. But no, I honestly do think the Hollywood character probably the most interesting thing going on in this film.
Yeah, I'm at odds with you on your thoughts on Kim Cattrall. I thought Kim Cattrall was important and bubbly and lively enough to keep this film afloat when the rest of it wasn't. So I'm going to say her. Final thoughts, looking ahead. Would you recommend to watch this movie either as a standalone piece of entertainment or as part of the argument is best movie in 1987?
I would say to anyone who has memories of having seen the film before, go back and reacquaint yourself with the movie. You will either, like Simon, just be a bit charmed by it, even though you know it's incredibly dopey, or you'll just think, oh my God, what was I thinking? Probably more the latter than the first, but mileage will vary. I honestly wonder what a person under the age of 30 would think watching this film today. Either they would love it for the kitsch value of it all, or they would just completely write off the 80s and the way that it probably deserves to be.
How did they ever make something like this? Yeah, I get that. Yeah. I don't know if it would. I'm trying to think if they would.
Sorry. Yeah. To answer the question, does it make 1987 one of the best movie years? I actually think it does.
Right.
Okay, because, and you kind of take this away from just the current sort of cultural context. I think at the time, I totally get why this was a big success and why people had a fun time watching it. But, and this gets back to what I was sort of trying to get to at the beginning with the podcast. In 1987, there was still a space for these hangout comedies in the cinema.
Yep.
Okay, there was no other entertainment like that really doing it at the time. But cut to just a couple of years later, I mentioned Beverly Hills 90210. The audience that would have turned up for Mannequin were obviously getting their pleasures satisfied through things like 90210 on the TV. And so that youth audience started moving more towards the television for these kind of thing. Like, that's why I talk about Mannequin being right at the end of that sort of hangout comedy party movie experience, because there was just no space for it really after that. And if you start getting into the 90s, you start seeing the films that are for people of that age, they become a lot more serious and they're a lot more internally focused on their mental health and relationship to themselves and what's falling apart around their lives. Like you think about, say, like a Heathers, for example.
Oh, look.
Very black comedy, but again, it's sort of very internalized. It's not a hangout film. There's a lot more substance going on to it.
Couldn't agree with you more, and you've absolutely poked the bear with your thoughts on 90s cinema. So much of 90s cinema, maybe not from your perspective, and this is a little bit of our age difference. 90s is when you kind of came of age as a movie watcher and watched so much. But I look back at the 90s and maybe this is a different podcast, but 90s cinema was kind of dismissed at the time as being, apart from the whole Pulp Fiction indie sort of boom, the studio stuff was kind of dismissed as being a little bit underwhelming, not very meaningful, not of much substance. You look back at it now, and it's quite a thoughtful period for American studio cinema, and that is another podcast. There's a lot of films that came out of that period which are really interesting to watch now in terms of how we're going to cope with the new millennium, how are we coping in a sort of post-AIDS world. 90s cinema is one of the most interesting things. But I digress. Would I recommend people watch this? Yes, please watch it. Stick it on at like 2:00 on a rainy Saturday afternoon. Walk in and out of it. Have a bit of a giggle. And I think you sum it up perfectly when you say you'll either see this through rose-colored glasses and ignore some of the terrible moments, or you'll kind of go, what the hell were people thinking when they watch this? But either way, it's good for a giggle. What are we doing next week, Dan Barrett?
Look, Simon, shifting gears, we are going to a film that I've never seen before. It's called Over the Top. It is a Sylvester Stallone vehicle.
Okay, now, this is a rare occurrence because I've never seen Over the Top before.
Hello.
I thought the notion of an arm wrestling competition starring Sylvester Stallone struck me as both A, just so dopey, and B, a riff on Rocky, which we'd already seen in a couple of Rocky sequels by this stage. So I never had much of an interest in seeing Over the Top. I'm going to have to fight that urge and see it before this time next week. I'm kind of looking forward to it. Ticking off a few shame file boxes here on my movie watching. There won't be many, but Over the Top's one of them.
Yeah, I'm so excited. So giving the plugs for
Really?
what's coming up in the coming weeks. Next week, Over the Top, I'm super jazzed. Week after that, Nightmare on Elm Street 3, The Dream Warrior, which I don't think I've seen, but we'll find out. We've got Lethal Weapon, Some Kind of Wonderful, Angel Hearts, and Raising Arizona.
Jeez,
So look,
that's good movie watching.
Oh, dude, you start getting after that, like it's just title after title that people.
I'm inclined to think that 1987 may be the best movie year ever.
Look, it shapes up. But anyway, we will get to that next week. Simon, do you want to give a quick plug for what you do?
You can see my writings on screen-space.net. You can hear our ramblings over on the Screen Watching podcast, which is available across all your podcast platforms. And Dan Barrett, I know you do a lot of good work.
Check me out at alwaysbewatching.com. It's a newsletter that comes out multiple times a week. It's got all the news and information needed about the TV, streaming, and film worlds. Simon Foster, the most important thing that anyone can do right now is to hit up our website. It's called bestmovieyear.com. And when you're there, sign up to the newsletter. You'll get an email once a week that tells you, hey, look, there's a new podcast out there, but also a few bonus materials. So you'll find video of the trailer, you'll find some Simon's musings, random bits of trivia, news and information, all bundled into that email.
You're my mannequin.
You're my mannequin too on the move. Folks.